Good evening. Welcome to the Hingham Board of Selectmen meeting for Tuesday, November 21st, 2017. First item of business is the approval of the November 7th, 2017 minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Public comment on items not on the agenda? Okay. We have a change of manager request for the 99? Yes. Hi, could you please join us at the table and introduce yourself? Are you Megan?
I am Megan, yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So, Megan, can you please tell the board and the audience what brings you here tonight?
I'm here because we're doing a change of manager license for the new opening for the Hingham 99. I was the previous general manager up until June. They transferred me to Plymouth, and I'm back, go into that beautiful building and get it going.
There you go. It looks nice. It's almost, it looks like it's pretty near to completion.
It's getting there. December 14th will be opening.
Wow.
Wow,
Terrific.
fantastic.
Terrific. And Tom, the paperwork and everything is all in order?
It is.
Okay. Are there any questions from my colleagues?
So the application notes that you've never been the manager of record of a premises licensed to sell alcoholic beverages. Just because you were the owner-manager of run-of-the-mill tavern in Plymouth?
Yes, I was not on the liquor license
Oh,
for
okay.
that.
So this is the first time you're on the liquor license? That's what this is suggesting?
No, I was on the liquor license for Hingham before.
She was the former manager at
Yes, and then I'm on Plymouth's liquor license right now
Okay,
for the 99, but never for the run-of-the-mill.
okay. So maybe just the wrong dot got checked here?
That could be a possibility,
Okay.
yes.
And the tips are safe serve certified?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And what's the training for bartenders by the 99?
Training for bartenders, every bartender has to go through responsible servers of alcohol, which is our version of tip certification.
Okay.
It's good for 2 years. We are very thorough with all of our certifications. With the reopening, every bartender, former and brand new, is required, and we'll be going through all of that as well.
Okay,
Again.
great. And I see you opened up like a pop-up interview location.
Yes, we did.
Right in that, right by Stop and Shop.
Yes.
That's great, great. Well, we're getting a lot of pressure, including from Bob, to move this along, so,
Well, we're getting there. We're on target, so.
good.
Karen, I see what you're referencing. We'll fix that in the application.
Okay.
Questions from the public? Would someone like to make a motion, please?
Sure, I'd move that we approve the request of 99 Restaurants of Boston LLC DBA and 99 Restaurants and Pub for a change of manager to Megan Cannonberg, subject to the approval of the Alcoholic Beverages Control Commission.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I'd like to note the applause
Pay no
from
attention
Bob.
to that clapping behind the curtain.
Thank you. Have a nice Thanksgiving.
You too.
Thanks a lot for
Thank you.
coming in.
Next on the agenda is Legal Seafoods change of manager. Are you Mr. Hayward? I am. Terrific. Have a seat.
I don't know if you need me. I am Donna Cruz, paralegal.
Oh, Ms. Cruz, welcome. Have a seat. And so, Mark, this is also a change of manager?
Yes, I just took over the new legal C-Bar in Hingham in the past couple weeks. General manager.
And you've been with, according to our records, you've been with Legal Seafoods just about 10 years? Okay. Tom, again, the paperwork is all in
I
order?
believe so, yes.
Okay.
I just checked the
Do you want me to
last.
look through it? Yeah.
Paul
Yes,
or
no questions.
Karen, any questions?
Yeah, have you been the manager of record at any other legal seafood establishments?
Yes, Chestnut Hill location in Newton.
Okay, great. And training for legal seafood
I'm
bartenders?
ServSafe certified alcohol, and I'm also a proctor for ServSafe to teach the class.
Great. Well, it's a nice bar at Legal Seafood.
Thank you.
Terrific. Someone like to make a motion?
Move to approve the request of Legal Seafoods LLC DBA Legal Sea Bar for a change of manager to Mark Hayward, subject to the approval of the Alcoholic Beverages Control Commission.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you so much for
Thank you
coming.
very
Thanks for
much.
coming in.
Welcome to
Thank you.
Hingham.
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, you as well.
Okay, next on the agenda, a few minutes ahead of schedule, but we can do that?
Which no
We
one's
can if you
ever
want, we
accused us
can-
of.
knock off a few of these other items down the bottom if you'd like.
You know what, why don't we take a couple of those votes? I think item number 3, Tom, could you tee that up?
So we're requesting that you name Jim Lampke as a hearing officer for a personnel matter in town.
So moved.
Second?
And I just note for the record that Mr. Lampke is not a resident of the town of Hingham.
Exactly.
Any discussion or comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay.
We also have a special one-day liquor license
Here we go.
for Cocktails LLC.
This is a 25th class reunion at the community center.
Community Center, yeah.
Okay, again, this is all in order.
Yes.
Questions from my colleagues?
Chief, you're all good with this?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Okay.
Is this on the
Excuse me, could you take a seat, please?
Sure.
And believe it or not, I have no questions.
Okay?
I have none.
Oh,
I have none.
I thought you said you have one.
No.
Would someone like to make a motion?
I move that we approve the issuance of a special one-day wine and malt beverages license to Jim Duntremont on behalf of Cocktails LLC for a 25th class reunion to be held at the Hingham Community Center on Saturday, November 25th, 2017, from 6:30 p.m. to 11 p.m.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I'm going to take one final vote, and then I believe there's someone here who wants to go back to a matter that the board just dispensed of, but I'll do that in a moment. Possible vote number 5.
So if you, oh yeah.
Yeah, why don't I take, since this has to do with you, why don't I take the lead
I
on
thought
this?
5 was the next one.
Pursuant to the Town Administrator Special Act, with the retirement of our Town Administrator, the board is required to designate an Interim Town Administrator, who is Mr. Mayo. And that for a period that can last no longer than 8 months, and that took effect on October 3rd, I believe, 3rd or 4th.
Yes.
And so what the board has done is we have actually developed goals and objectives for the interim town administrator role. And while it's not necessarily a requirement, we thought that in the interest of sort of visibility and transparency, that the board would vote these goals and objectives in public session. So I don't know if either of my colleagues has any questions about or comments.
I'd just like to say, Mary, I know you took the lead in both structuring these and very thoughtfully describing the many duties, the many ways that Tom interacts with folks around town, folks in town government and external to town government. And I appreciate the amount of time that you put in, because I think it's a great document, and I think it's one that will help us work productively.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
I'd say the same thing in a different way.
Okay.
It's a big list. So,
It is.
yeah.
And it's especially this time of year. Would someone like to make a motion?
Sure. I'll move to approve the goals and objectives for the interim town administrator.
I second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. The board, a moment ago, the board voted on a motion to designate a hearing officer, but I think somebody came into the room and wanted to speak to that. So just 1 second. If my colleagues are willing that we reopen that item of discussion, I just think procedurally.
I'll defer to the chair.
Yeah, that's okay with me.
Okay. Could you come up to the microphone, please?
Good evening, Sean Kavanaugh. I'm the Vice President, Local 405. That's the Superior Officers Union. I apologize for interrupting.
That's okay.
Madam Chair. My purpose here tonight is to speak towards the appointment of the hearing officer. And Corey Farina, as you know, is scheduled for a disciplinary hearing on December 5th. And we've had a lot of discussion over the last 9 months regarding that issue. So I don't want to mispronounce his name, Mr. Lampke.
Yes.
So he's on the votes for this evening to become the hearing officer. Mr. Farina objects to Mr. Lampke as a hearing officer with the sole purpose to that is he's the neighboring town's town council. He, as far as I know, has heard other matters here in town. I'm not sure. Is that the case? I don't know.
He has been the hearing officer for one other hearing in town.
Okay. It's basically the fact that he is, his purpose is that obviously he wants somebody who's fair and objective, and that that does not scream fair and objective to us, the neighboring town's town council. And you might understand that, you might not, but you know, that's his perspective. So I would request that Mr. Feely speak with Mr. Morgan, who represents Local 405, and get together somehow and request a neutral third person who has no stake in, you know, anything thus far in town. And there's hundreds of other certified arbitrators out there who could hear this matter. So, you know, for our perspective, again, it just doesn't scream fair and objective when we're using the town council from the neighboring town. That's it in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you.
And so, again, we just request Mr. Feely get in touch with Mr. Morgan, he represents 405, and come together with some neutral perspective on this. It's been 9 months, he's been out for 9 months. And we'd like to see him back to work as soon as, it's not to delay this any longer. It's not the purpose of this. We'd really like to see him back sooner rather than later.
Okay, thank you.
And if I may add just one more thing. We'd like to request that the board attend the hearing. And it's solely to the purpose of, ultimately you'll be making a decision on this officer's employment. And so it's scheduled for 2 days. I know it might be a bit of an inconvenience, but in order to get a full perspective and make an educated decision on this thing, we request that you be there and not just simply read text from all the witnesses, 2 days worth of witnesses. It's, you know, as I said, he's been out for 9 months. We'd like the board to be there and really see, you know, for 9 months you've had one half of a story. And so we'd like you to physically be there to get that other half.
Thank you.
And I appreciate that, and I apologize.
No worries. So I think there have been 2 requests. One, I don't think we need to take up at this time, but we will take that back with us. With respect to the vote for the hearing officer, I would just, I'll share my perspective, and then if either of my colleagues wishes to make a motion. And Tom, I'm just going to ask you to confirm for me, but on matters like this, typically the town administrator is the hearing officer in matters of such as this. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and so one of the reasons that the town was designating Mr. Lampke as a hearing officer was the fact that this is a matter that has been going on for a period of time, and we thought for matters of objectivity and fairness that it might be appropriate in these circumstances, particularly with the retirement of the town administrator, that we go outside to have an independent hearing officer, which is not something the board is required to do, but that was why this advanced. I am comfortable with that decision. I don't see a need to reopen the vote, but if either of my colleagues felt differently, this would be the time to make a motion to reopen the vote.
No, I appreciate your comments, and I appreciate your comments too, and I think our goals are the same. I guess we're just, perception-wise, we're coming out in a different place. You know, I frankly felt it was more fair and objective to have an independent hearing officer hear the facts and listen to the story anew, right? This is going to be a brand new place to for both sides to share their perspective on this really, really important matter. So I felt like we were doing the right thing in designating an independent hearing officer. And, you know, again, we rely on advice of counsel in helping us identify a hearing officer who's capable of hearing a matter as complex as this and delivering a fair and independent judgment on it. And I think that when I looked at the recommendation, I looked at this situation, I looked at the role of the board and the town administrator, that's why I took the vote that I took. So even though, again, earlier tonight, that vote was really quick, this has been the product of, you know, of a number of evenings of discussion around what's the fairest, best way to handle a very sensitive and really, really important matter. And that's the vote that we took.
I have nothing further.
Okay. So I think we will then move on. The next item on the agenda is the Advisory Committee Financial Analysis Update, and I think we're going to have Jim and Dan?
Just Dan.
Just Dan? Good evening.
Thanks for being here.
So, Dan, I think you're going to kind of set this up and
Okay.
tell a little bit about, we've talked in this room a little bit about the very important work that you and the subcommittee has been doing on trying to take a look at our financial picture, specifically as it relates to financing some of the large municipal and education capital projects that are coming down the pike. So I'll turn it over to you.
All right, well, I will make some comments about the model itself, how it's constructed, and what it's intended to do, without boring you with the level of detail that the model itself encompasses. And especially because I note that approximately half the room is either a current advisory committee member, chairman, or a prior advisory committee chairman. So I feel a great deal of intimidation as I make these comments.
As you should.
As I should.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, good for you? All right.
Yes.
All right, so again, I would ask my colleagues on this subcommittee, Tom, John, and Jim to interrupt me where I perhaps go astray. Essentially, the model has been something that was put together by this subcommittee, appointed by the advisory committee. It's been reviewed in detail. First with the town administrator, as well as with the town treasurer and the town accountant, for purposes of ensuring its accuracy. It's also been reviewed on a number of occasions by the full advisory committee and been approved by the committee. The model itself, in terms of context, is intended to be owned by the town administrator. And it's any request for using the model or putting it through the paces would go through the town administrator's office. So that's a little bit of the context. In terms of terminology, there are a number of points that are important to understand about the model itself. First is, it makes a distinction between non-excluded debt and excluded debt. And of course, non-excluded debt is debt issued by the town as part of the town's operating budget, pursuant to Articles 4, 5, and 6 of the annual town budget. Excluded debt, on the other hand, is debt that's issued by the town for purposes of borrowing money for special projects and requires a 2/3 vote at town meeting. So we have non-excluded debt, which we had a hard time understanding why non-excluded doesn't mean included, but it doesn't. It's different. So we have non-excluded debt and we have excluded debt. Additionally, the model treats two issues of debt service versus debt capacity. And debt service is the annual payment of interest and principal on a loan, while debt capacity is the amount of the borrowing that would be allowed. So an important distinction. And then lastly, the model itself distinguishes between debt that's serviced by the town levy, that's paid by the taxpayers of the town, versus debt that might be paid for or incurred as a result of different borrowings that would be paid through user fees. So for instance, if the town were to acquire the water company, or to do something on the sewer commission, or do something with the country club, there would be user fees that would be servicing the debt for those instruments. That's not included here. This is just for the town's borrowing capacity. So the model itself is pretty straightforward, once you get through it. And what it's intended to do is evaluate the impact of potential capital projects, again, on the Hingham tax levy. It starts with certain current data, so the baseline for the town. It has a 15-year debt schedule that the town has for existing debt. It has the latest 5-year forecast for the town, and it has the latest assessment and classification report from the assessor's office. So those are the three baseline items of the financial picture for the town. And using that background, the user, the person who wants to, test this model and understand, what the results would be, would input things such as the, the amount to be borrowed, the interest rate at which it would be borrowed, the timing at which it would be borrowed, and then would also make assumptions with regard to whether certain assets of the town, such as the town fund balance, would be used in any way, or if the unused tax levy would be changed in any way. So putting those inputs into the model, a person would be able to test a number of different things. And again, depending on the question you'd ask. But I would also at this point note that the model itself is project agnostic. This is a model that works for any kind of borrowing the town wants to do under the town's tax levy for whatever project. And we purposely avoided looking at any of the projects or even identifying what those projects were, whether it's the school department or whatever it might be, a new town hall or a new police department, whatever it might be. This model works for any of those particular opportunities. And so we tested it. In fact, we had a few assumptions that Chairman Power gave us, questions asked, and to give you an example of what the model would do. For instance, the first question was, how much non-excluded debt service and debt capacity is created by the expiring debt over the next 5 years? So we have debt rolling off over the next 5 years. 5 years from now, how much debt service would we not be paying, and how much could we borrow with that money? If we were to try and say, let's use that money to pay debt service on a new loan. We had to make an assumption then, about the timing. The assumption is the amount of the borrowing is the answer, and a 4% interest rate. The model shows that in 5 years, in 2022, we would have a reduction in debt service of $576,000, and at 4% over a 20-year term, you could borrow $6.4 million. So that's the non-excluded debt. That's within the operating budget.
So I'm just gonna kind of start, a little layperson commentary on this, but what that really kind of says to me is that we could, as a town, within the next 5 years, we could borrow money for a $6 million project without raising people's taxes.
Right.
But that's it. I think there's been some conceptions out there that we have a lot of capacity. I think, some of this is terminology, but within our forecast, we can do one $6 million project. So in the past, for example, we did the Central Fire Station. And we went to town meeting and said, we want to do this fire station, we'll keep it in the operating budget, not going to raise your taxes for this. So that's the amount that's there. I think it's also important that we know going into the budget season that if we reallocate that debt service that's rolling off, we won't have it in 5 years. So we have to, we have to save it. The way it's, the analogy I'd use is you pay the last payment of your car payment, and if that couple $100 you start using for other parts of your household, you can't go out and get a loan for that second car or for something else. So
Right.
$6 million.
Yep, good. The second question that was asked is how much excluded debt service and debt capacity is created over the same period of time by 2022. And using the same assumed interest rate, what we found is the debt service declines for this excluded debt by $915,000, and that you could borrow approximately $10 million, $10.2 million at that time frame. But again, you'd have to go back to town meeting to be able to borrow that money. That's, again, the tax rate and the tax bill wouldn't change, but it would not be something included in the operating budget. It'd have to be a 2/3 vote at town meeting to service that, to allow for that debt to be floated. So
So it's kind of replacement debt.
Replacement debt, yeah. So between the two of those, there is replacement debt, if you will, about $16 million between the two of them. $6 million in the budget and $10 million that'd be above the budget, as a special vote at town meeting.
And that's within the next 5 years,
That's in
Dan.
2022, and again, it depends on lots of factors. If interest rates are higher or lower, that amount that you can borrow goes up or down. But, again, in using the model, someone would have to input the amount of the debt, the timing of the debt borrowing, and the interest rate that they assume, for that, so that they'd be able to, again, focus on that number. So those numbers are likely to change. In fact, I'd suggest they have to change, Otherwise, we'd be in Washington working for the Fed and being, sitting there prognosticating. So, isn't that right? Yeah,
Yes.
Would be, okay, all right. But I want to check, I don't want to, go off on a tangent here.
We're glad you're here with us.
Okay. The last question, it was kind of an important one because it sort of gives us a benchmark. What is the impact of a new $10 million loan in 2020 at 4% for 20 years on the average taxpayer, the average home? So we went through, put it into the model, and if we borrowed $10 million in 2020 for whatever project, and this is presumably an excluded debt item, for 20 years, it would impact the average taxpayer in Hingham by $111 per year, or about 0.9% of the average tax bill. Now, because the way municipal debt works, and the payments actually decline over time, in the 5th year of that loan, the payment would have gone down to $101. So it's somewhere, for a $10 million loan, it's somewhere around $100, $110 is the impact on the average taxpayer in town.
And the average assessed value home, I was surprised at that number.
775,
795.
Wow. So if your house is assessed at less than 795, that increase would be less, but if your home is valued more. Yeah. So that would mean too that, if you said, just round numbers, $50 million. $50 million, a $50 million debt issue would add over $500 in the first year to the average assessed value home.
A couple of other points I think are, well, they're not quantitative, they are important. The model also allows you to accelerate or delay debt. It also allows you to say, what if we did, you picked 50 million, pick the number, I want to do so much in each year, and at different interest rates. It allows you to develop some sensitivity, and I think it allows for some longer term planning. In the past we've tended to look at things in a more discrete annual basis, and this would allow for some projection based on the time frame of when you thought some of these projects would come online. When we started to put the model together, we were picking numbers and just throwing it into year one. We said, it can't happen in year one. You have to go, it takes so much time for the town to decide what it wants to do and to, then come to town meeting. And so nothing is going to happen in April. It's a question of timing, and that becomes very, very important to the capacity of the town, as this model would show. And then lastly, the model, someone asked a question of us at the advisory committee, how much work is there involved with this model? And very easy for me to say it's not much because I don't have to do it, right, Tom? But, the fact of the matter is that some of the data points that have to be put in, such as the classification data, the 15-year, debt schedule and the 5-year projections, are all, done periodically. And so those should be updated probably, once a year, unless we did a debt issue or something in the interim period of time. And then, the model is then sensitive, to, again, the inputs that someone puts in terms of the timing of when they want to borrow the money. So we think it's hopefully a useful tool that allow the town to do some longer-term financial planning, understand the impact on the taxpayers, and at the same time, not be a burden on, the town administrator and his colleagues from the treasurer and the town accountant's office. So.
Questions,
That's it.
comments?
No, I have no questions.
Sure you want.
Just absorbing it. Thank you. Thank you.
Well done, well done. So just again, to come back to a point I think you made, is the model does not consider ratepayer or user fee sponsored debt
That's right.
service, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
And then The other thing, I guess, that strikes me about the model is that while it seems mechanical, it strikes me that there are really a number of policy decisions that have to get made at sort of every level of the budget for this to really be an accurate depiction of what our financial projections would be.
Absolutely right, yeah.
So it's a tool, I guess, right? But it's a tool for policymakers.
Yeah, one of the other things the tool will do is it tracks our debt service spending compared to our financial policy that the advisory committee has in place. So it gives them a measurement tool to determine whether or not we're above or below the limits as specified within our financial policy. But you're right, I think it's a really powerful tool to be used for determining timing of potential projects, and a tool to analyze the full impact on the taxpayer. And it will give you the ability to determine how to actually minimize that impact over time as well.
Right. And I guess I'd add on the policy side, one of the timing issues becomes the programmatic needs of whatever department is putting forth their capital plan and working with capital outlay on the advancement of those large capital projects. So, again, I think it's a very, very important metric, but it's also part of a larger discussion.
Right. Well, the three important, at least three of the important policy points would be the one, first of all, we've been saving the money that we have on debt that's burned off. We established that 2 years ago. That's a policy that, we have in place. You could decide to change that policy. Another would be the unused tax levy.
Yep.
Again, it's left at $500,000 as it has been. That's a policy that could be modified. And then the use of fund balance is, of course, another tool, but it's been left assumed that it has no impact on this at all. So,
Okay.
Those inputs, again, are more policy-driven than they are suggesting of the individual project itself.
Yep, okay, thank you. Well, again, it just, I think it's going to be very helpful. I think it's going to be a tool that will be very helpful to both us and to the advisory committee and to the capital outlay committee in assessing what we know is coming down the pike at us. So.
I do want to note that the hard work that the other members of the committee did in terms of putting this together.
Oh, it wasn't just you, Dan?
No, it wasn't me. Please, no, I'm not taking credit or responsibility. But I do note that John sent me the version 16 the other day, which he pointed out is twice as powerful as version 8. And I asked whether the growth in the power was logarithmic or linear. And if it's logarithmic, we think we can launch a man to the Mars by using this model. So.
Yeah, so both John Asher and Tom Piles were critical members of this committee. We met quite frequently over the summer, so.
Great.
My appreciation to them and their hard work.
Yes.
As well as
Thank you,
Dan.
gentlemen, one and all.
Very much.
Just add a couple of things. I'd also say thank you, as we're all looking at these big capital projects, and, I'm just, off the top of my head, I'm thinking 2 fire stations, town hall, which includes senior center, police, recreation, a question of whether they can all fit here. I'd say not in this footprint. The potential for Foster School, and the library. Just if you ballpark some of those numbers, I would say that you get to $50 million very quickly. I should also mention the harbor. I think, in a lot of cases, we're hoping that we might be able to get grant funding to shore up the wharfs, but certainly those are important infrastructure needs as well. And when I hear that $50 million and the impact on the taxpayer, what it says to me is that while we have some room within our forecast and with debt that's expiring, it's very small compared to the totality of the capital needs that I think we have over the next 10 years. And I think that it's going to be important that we not only look at the staging both in terms of the taxpayer, but also in terms of our AAA bond rating, because it's that bond rating that gives us the ability to get the most competitive rates. And so what this also says to me is that as we move forward in this, we have to be thoughtful, not just at the projects that are coming in front of us, but what else is out there on the landscape. I think we'll have a clearer line of sight this fall as we hear from the MSBA. But my hope would be that, you know, this board, so we have the ability when we go through the budget on the debt service to kind of hold the line on that and to keep creating that capacity. As we get into the budgets in December, I hope we'll do that. Earlier this year, we made a policy decision that we did not want to apply the unused levy capacity to the operating budget. I like the idea of saving that to help pay for some of the big projects. And we're going to see the fund balance memo probably next month. And when there's excess fund balance, it's often tempting to say, well, let's use it for some things. The advisory committee has a policy on that, so that those decisions are not made in a vacuum. But what it highlights to me is the importance as we get into the operating budget of really being careful about not overextending our operating budget capacity. Because it seems to me that these big projects that are all coming along in the next 10 years are going to require us asking the taxpayers for some extra money. So as we get into the budgets, I hope we can balance it. And again, this is a great tool to help us use data to have these conversations. I think if we have a common set of data, I just think it helps make these conversations much more productive. So really appreciate it. I know that there has been some interest from other groups in, kind of getting a sense of things. So as we move through the budget, we should talk about the right way to do that.
Okay.
So,
I would just like to follow up.
please.
The South Hingham Study Group issued a report a few weeks back. One of the findings that we came up with was that 1 in 5 households in this town make less than $40,000 a year. So I'm sensitive to those people, very sensitive, especially with the kind of numbers that are floating around here in tonight's discussion.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think this is kind of the start of some conversation. I think this is getting a little bit of information out there, getting some public reaction, and hopefully we'll continue to have these discussions. Thank you again to everybody.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda is a discussion on marijuana, and I just want to frame up what we're going to do here tonight, because I know that the planning board has been having some hearings. Really, the purpose tonight is sort of procedural. We've gotten a lot of information that's been shared with the planning board and with the public about the scope of the marijuana bill and the resulting decisions that communities have to make. And what I've asked Tom to do is to walk us through, it's kind of a decision tree that lays out the kind of a little bit of a framework for how we as a town are going to look at some of this. And again, what I see us doing tonight is deciding whether we as a board want to direct Tom to begin the process of preparing warrant articles. It doesn't mean the warrant articles will go in the warrant. We'll have a chance to have hearings, but again, just to sort of scope out the work. So, Tom, if you want to
Sure.
walk
Bob,
us
if
through.
can you zoom in on the little board here, the little table? Sure. So one of the things we've put together as a town to help the town understand this dialogue is a decision tree. This decision tree starts with one question: does the town want to ban marijuana establishments? So starting with that question, we have a decision tree that stems from that, yes or no. If the answer is yes, then there is a need for a general bylaw as well as some work from the planning board's perspective regarding a zoning bylaw, to ask that question. If the answer is no, then you have a series of actions that you would consider taking to help to regulate the use and sale of marijuana in the town. And some of those potential regulations might look like, might be the question as to whether or not to allow the sale of marijuana products for consumption on the premises where sold. You may want to impose local sales tax upon sale or transfer of marijuana or marijuana products. And you may want to prohibit or regulate the possession or consumption of marijuana within public buildings. So those are some of the types of potential regulation decisions that could be pending.
Do you want to just, I know the planning board is working, but just to give everybody and the public a chance to understand the types of things the planning board is working on, could you just highlight those?
Sure. So those ones that I just spoke to were the general bylaw would be where the Board of Selectmen's purview would lie. The planning board has their own set of requirements that they would have to look into with regards to zoning bylaws. If we're going to regulate the sale of marijuana through a marijuana establishment in town, then you would, if the answer is yes, you want to do that, then there's a town meeting vote for a zoning amendment to, for a moratorium, for another potential moratorium, or to regulate the time, place, and manner of marijuana sales and use regulations. The other possibility is to, again, enact well, no, if you wouldn't enact another moratorium. That moratorium's already expiring here in April of 2018. So that's what the zoning board is doing. They're looking at time, place, and manner, and/or moratoriums, and that's under their purview, not the board's purview.
And we've been advised by council that if the town wishes to ask town meeting whether it wants to ban marijuana establishments, it's recommended that we introduce both a general bylaw and a zoning bylaw.
That's right.
And so the planning board will be taking up the matter of a zoning bylaw. If this board, so it would be this board's purview to take up a general bylaw, obviously they would have to be consistent where they need to be.
Yep, that's right.
Thank you. Does Paul or Karen, I know this is a big topic and we've gotten a ton of information. Questions, comments?
Sure. And as I understand it, this speaks to the use of land, correct?
Yes and no. It also speaks to the concept of a general ban.
Right. But the idea of a general bylaw is kind of a belt and suspenders approach as recommended by the AG, but it hasn't been determined to be upheld by the court.
The zoning bylaw is the one is the bylaw that would hold the most water with regards to regulations. The general bylaw is intended to back up the zoning bylaw.
The zoning bylaw requires a 2/3 vote versus
That's
general
right.
ordinance is simple majority, correct?
That's right, exactly, yeah.
I understand it procedurally.
Okay. Karen?
I don't have any questions.
So I just want to see real quick, is there anyone in the audience who has a question or a comment? Bonner, come on up to the microphone, please.
Bonard Phage, 100 Wampatuck Road. I would like to point out a couple of things. This has been considered a no town. That's what they're trying to label it. And that is based on the fact that this town in question 4 voted against recreational cannabis. The vote was for recreational cannabis statewide. That has been decided. To try to use that as an indicator that we want to ban it in this town, I believe, is way off track. you're dealing with something, it's just a matter of time. Every time it goes in front of the people, cannabis prevails, in spite of the billions of dollars that's been thrown against it, in spite of all the boogeyman and all the whatever. I'm not going to really expound on that. But what I'm suggesting is that you folks, as much as I respect and really appreciate what you're doing, I think it's really too much power to be handed to you to make a decision. I think what we as a town should do is put it on the actual voting ballot in April. Not the town meeting ballot, but the ballots of the people who elect you, the people who pay the police, the people who pay everybody else, or the people who, the citizens of this town. Then we have an accurate count of what Hingham wants. It's not really complicated. Right now, we have different groups right now. That one is a little more feisty than the other. But the cannabis folks will organize, and eventually we will prevail. And what it comes down to is that you know, we are not revisiting question 4. It is passed. It is legal. This is all about commerce now. And it's just a matter of time. If the town finds a way to ban it through you people, or even if it ban it outright, it's just a matter of time before the money's going to Hull, which apparently is considering it. Brewster apparently, which is also considering it. Amherst just had they are allowing it now. They're going to be taxing it. Marshfield and Marshfield has been a ridiculously strong opponent of cannabis, and it just got its cookies handed to it by an organized group. So what I'm asking you people to do, you're lawyers and you're in finances, you understand the financial concept, but what I think, and I speak for many people who have already come up to me, and I didn't intend to become the face of cannabis in this town. That's the last thing I wanted to do. In fact, I'm a very light user of the stuff. But anyway, you know, I'm speaking for the people who are not coming up and they're worried about being ridiculed. They're worried about being told that they're pro-drugs and pro-this. I'm used to being ridiculed. I have no problem with it. You know, they're telling me, and they're agreeing with me, is just put it on the actual ballot. Once you decide, the town decides, if it wants to have recreational cannabis, then all this other stuff can be worked out. Most people prefer, and these are what the studies say, most people would like to have it treated like alcohol. We have alcohol licenses. We can, you know, the town meeting can decide how many licenses or whatever. You can do all the sub work from there. But the main thing is, the same people who elected you, you should give the option of deciding whether they want recreational cannabis in our town. And you folks have the ability to set it up in such a way that, you know, we can all decide, as opposed to having, say, town meeting, which, you know, it's going to be, what, about 1/10 of the population, if that. Having what the heck was I going to say? Having a special town meeting, which kind of benefits me financially, but I want no special town meeting. This is, and please pay attention to what I'm saying. There are a lot of people. I know grandparents in this town that use cannabis. I know great-grandparents in this town that use cannabis. And it's, you know, this is not about children. You know, the thought and the stuff that is being put forth as though, you know, we are going to be giving cannabis to children is insulting. And if we do allow recreational cannabis, it's kind of ridiculous to think that somebody's going to risk their license to sell something to a kid. These kids are, you know, if they don't believe us when it comes to what we tell our children about cannabis, that's been used for tens of thousands of years, billions of times, not one single overdose. So when we try to communicate to our children that, you know, that this is bad and it's a gateway drug and everything, they are not listening to us. They are tuning it out. We have serious problems with opioids. We have serious problems with antidepressants, with all kinds of things, and that have nothing to do with cannabis. But yet that seems to be the way that everybody is trying to go. So I'd just like to, you know, point that out to you and just consider that in in your deliberations. Please.
you.
Yeah, just, and like I say, there are many people in this town, it's even surprised me, but they're sort of just remaining and lurking in the corners, and they're not saying anything, but you give them the ballot, and then you'll know exactly, or you'll have the best description, or you have the best idea or indication of what the town actually wants. And in the meantime, if we can get it on the ballot, we could have open debates in the Sanders Auditorium, whatever. We can have people come in, and we can have either experts or whatever. But this is something, we all love this town, we all love our children, but trying to make this an issue about protecting the children is really beyond the pale. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bonner, thank you for being a voice for people.
The downtrodden.
For
Them too.
everybody, just a couple pieces, because Tom and I have sat in on a couple of meetings on this, but Bonner mentioned that we are a no community. He's correct. The state, we have these ballot questions, and they're for the whole state. Procedurally, the fact that we're a no town means that a town meeting can vote to ban marijuana establishments if that vote is taken before the end of 2019. In other communities, that ban would have to go to a ballot. So to Bonner's point, we have the ability to do this at town meeting. I would also add that the regulations from the state, we've been told the latest thing is that the draft initial regulations will be issued no later than March 15th of 2018. And so there is some uncertainty as to what those state regulations might look like. And Tom, my understanding is that if there are local regulations that are in conflict with the state regulations carry the day.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. So there's some
Well, what does that mean?
uncertainty.
If the local is more strict than the state,
Yeah.
the state controls?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Yep.
It's not like the federal government versus the
So,
state government.
Anyway, that's, those were a couple pieces.
We're not speaking to the merits tonight.
No, I tell you, no. I think, for me, I'm trying to sort of sift through the process first to
These are the
understand the
procedural
merits.
steps that have been
Yeah,
set
I
out
mean-
by the statute.
Right. I tell you, the League of Women Voters had an event last week, and a member of the planning board was there, and there was a lot of thoughtful discussion about pros and cons of banning marijuana establishments or opening them, and it just made me realize that this is a complex subject. There are a lot of different pieces to it. I have the sense, just personally, that for some citizens in Hingham, some people probably have their mind made up right now. Others, I think, might say, well, it depends on how you regulate it. And so that the planning board's work, to me, is very important. I think it would certainly inform my thinking. So, my thought tonight, trying to figure out how to step through this, is to, suggest that we ask Tom to prepare warrant articles for the areas that we influence. And by asking him to prepare them, we're not saying we support them. We're just starting to get the work done.
Well, as I understand it, the only one that we can really speak to with any force would be a general bylaw.
So-
The planning board would propose the zoning bylaw
Right, we would do a
changes.
general bylaw, but as Tom mentioned,
Taxation.
there's a taxation question, and
Oh, I
there's
see.
on-site consumption and consumption within public buildings. So those are sort of in our purview. And the taxation question, I think Bonner mentioned that it's economic. I think the state views this as potentially a revenue tool for municipalities. So, I don't even know, sitting here, would that be a few dollars, a lot of dollars? So I'd like to kind of put some work into some of these things. I'm also mindful that there are some groups within the community And we heard from a resident a few weeks ago who said, Selectmen, if you're not going to put a ban forward, we will.
Sure.
My own preference is that if we prepare a warrant article, we have the benefit of counsel and of staff, so that if the will of the people is to bring that issue forward, I want it to be done in a form where town meeting can act on it.
Well, and to your point, we also need to be prepared for a town meeting vote either way. So if town meeting were to vote a ban down, it strikes me that we'd want warrant articles in place to then deal with the ancillary issues that you and Tom noted.
Yeah, and how to regulate it. So, I mean, one thing that concerns me about a ballot vote is that a ballot vote would be after town meeting.
Right.
And if we don't have regulations in place, I'm just, you know, it feels to me like we might be exposed a little bit.
Yeah, and then what do we do? Because then it's another whole cycle potentially for us to get our act together.
Yeah.
So.
And, you know, I'm mindful, Barney, 1 second, okay? I'm mindful that we're approaching the end of November and, you know, warrant articles and budgets. So while warrant articles aren't due until January 20th, I was hoping that we could kind of get Tom and staff working on it, so that we would have time.
I guess my reaction to all of this is that I heard Miss Ellsbury come in too. So I understand that that's an option, and you know, the statute's laid out our options here. This is the path, whether you like it or not. This is what it has been directed, and I think we'd be remiss not to take this next step and prepare for either alternative to occur.
And, you know, I'll be the first to say that, you know,
Speaking of the merits is another issue
yeah,
entirely.
I mean, you know, directing Tom to, or asking, I don't like directing, asking Tom to prepare a warrant article for a ban, we may vote it down.
Yep.
We may have a split vote. It's not, voting to go ahead procedurally is not a vote on the merits. It's really to just...
You touched on this earlier too, Mary. I just want to make sure everyone understands the importance of these general bylaw articles being consistent with what the planning board is going to do. We don't want to have an inconsistent process that subsequently don't work together.
Yeah.
It could easily invite a litigation challenge, though. I mean, we're talking about using a general ordinance to regulate a use of the land.
And one of the things so the planning board, just to just close up, the planning board, you know, their zoning articles are due on December 1st. So they've been working quite hard on what they call time, manner, and place.
A lot.
You know, where, when, hours of operation, number of facilities, and so they're moving ahead on that. But one of the things that we talked about is that, well, two things. The first one is that as those bylaws are being formed, that, you know, Paul will be our liaison on this, but, you know, it'll be important that we kind of, you know, that we work together on that. And the second piece is that in a lot of cases, the planning board typically doesn't bring their warrant articles to us until March.
Right.
It's courtesy because we don't vote on them. One of the things we've said is perhaps in January, it might be helpful for us and the community to have the planning board come in and give us an overview of where this work is headed, so that we have a chance to provide input. And again, we can make sure that we're consistent where we need to be.
That's right. Very good.
Okay. Bonner, something to add?
Yeah, just further, I forgot to say, you wrote a letter to the planning board. It was an extraordinary letter. I just want to thank you for that letter. It was very
Thank you.
thoughtful. It was just laid it all out. Is it possible to make any bylaws contingent upon the general vote after the election? So in other words, if we decided, because I think the question right now is, does the town of Hingham want to ban the sales of recreational marijuana? Not does it want to grow them, this, that, the other thing. There's all these little subgroups, and that's why I say, I think we should decide if the town proper, the majority of people, the actual voters, not at the town meeting, because it's not, I mean, it is a representation, but you know, we all know what things can happen at town meeting that are different than the actual ballot. So is there any way that when you do craft a bylaw, that you do it in such a way that it is contingent upon a yay or a nay in the following election?
And I think, I'm not sure that we
I
can
don't know if
answer
it's
that
possible.
tonight,
I'm
but
just-
could I think maybe we'll take that as a to-do to find out,
I didn't
because
mean
I
to give
just
him
don't
more
know.
homework either, but,
That's okay. No, we're all,
It's got a big list.
yeah.
no,
Thank you.
let's just see about that. I don't know the
I just,
answer.
what it comes down to is that, you know, I just don't want to see, and even if it's if it's 100% pro-cannabis, I do not want to see a small nucleus of people co-opt with the general citizenry.
Sure.
And that's,
Sure.
you know, that's my, if we lose in a fair fight, that's fine. We won in a fair fight in question 4. Our lovely elected officials in Boston, the anti-cannabis people who have been that way for 20 years, they are doing a mulligan and they are trying to sort of retrofit it. So just listen to what the people say, and this is a little heads up. There might be another ballot coming in the not-too-distant future that's going to make question 4. The original Bay State repeal question was far more beneficial to the public and less beneficial to the marijuana industry. But the fact of the matter remains that question 4 is the law right now. And, you know, there are other things. So I'm hoping that Hingham gets on the right side of it. And eventually, it's going to be just like, you know, it's commerce. It's that simple.
Yeah, thank you. Is there anyone else who had a comment on this, Chief?
Good evening. Wanted to, I'll always be your friend, so I don't care what people say about you. I love you. My feeling on this issue is, as a law enforcement officer, it's not our battle right now to make a lot of the decisions on and rehash the vote that took place in Massachusetts. But what I urge the town of Hingham to do is to carefully consider the long history that Hingham has had in reviewing the process, reviewing the zoning, the regulations, and all the work that goes into keeping our community a safe community for everyone. And I think when we talk about some of the subjects, my feeling goes out is that, you know, how many pot shops are there going to be? Where are they going to be? Are we going to be selling them at the local candy stores? Or, I mean, there's just so many questions out there. And I think the key to this really is going to be the zoning issues, the planning board issues, and the careful consideration. I mean, we have such a long history in Hingham of doing the right thing. And I think this is one of those issues, regardless how you feel about it, is going to be relying on the town boards and systems to do the right and proper thing. And I don't think anyone wants a proliferation. We spent 2 hours arguing about where a tattoo shop should be at one town meeting. So the town, you know, the people are concerned about this. They're concerned about where buildings are going to be. And I sort of right at this point think that the town needs to sort of stand back and let the regulations come out. If the state is promising this in March of 2017, I don't expect it to come out in March of 2017. 18. I mean, they never seem to be out when they say. So they're asking us to make decisions. I don't think we need to rush into any decisions, but we do need to prepare ourselves properly so when the decisions and the laws are finalized, we're in a position to maintain the great character of Hingham that we see out there. We don't want to be overrun. You know, I think I sort of remember the debate years ago. We don't allow drive-in restaurants in the town of Hingham, and there was a reason for that. We want to keep that character. That's something that we have decided what we want to look like as a community, and I think this is one of those times that we as the people and the leadership need to do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chief.
Chief, thank you for your thoughtful comments. You know, I agree that this is a subject that has to be treated thoughtfully and carefully. I think the town was able to do that with respect to pornography. And the planning board crafted regulations at a time when I sat on it, and we were able to successfully get town meeting support so that should such an activity come into this town, it would be very carefully regulated and controlled, and it is. And as far as I know, there's no porn stores in this town.
I'm not aware of any.
Yeah. So, you know, I have great confidence that the planning board is very capable of coming up with regulations that would speak to the concerns that you've just raised. And, you know, I look forward to a balanced discussion on it going forward, but I don't think tonight's the night for that.
No, I would agree with that.
Thank you. And I would just add that, that the planning board is going to be, because the zoning articles are due on December 1st, then they will be beginning hearings in January. So there is ample opportunity for the public to participate, and those meetings are always posted. I would just note for the record as well that the board received correspondence today from the school committee. Last night, the school committee voted, it is a request to ban all retail recreational marijuana establishments in Hingham. Again, we're not debating the merits tonight, but we do have one elected board that has provided some input to both this board and the planning board. So I think with that in mind, if either of my colleagues are interested in advancing a motion to direct the interim town administrator with respect to warrant articles.
Sure. I'd like to move that we direct the interim town administrator to prepare for consideration by the board warrant articles proposing general bylaws governing all potential non-zoning regulations of recreational marijuana to the extent permitted by state law, including without limitation general bylaws that would address a full or partial ban, taxation, and public use.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
All right.
Then I think,
The last item on your agenda
yes.
is a policy change that I put on in your packets for your consideration at your next meeting. I wanted to tee this up for you tonight. For years now, I understand the selectmen have had a policy in the selectmen's policy book regarding a smoke-free workplace. In an effort to be consistent with town regulations across the board, the Board of Health had adopted a new prohibiting smoking in workplaces and public places regulation last January. January of 16. So I am asking that you take a chance to flip through this, discuss it maybe at our next meeting, and see if it's something that you want to consider adopting as a selectmen's policy.
And if this was a selectmen's policy, its authority would extend to the buildings over which the selectmen have custody?
And public places as well.
Okay.
So publicly owned places, parks and that type of thing, playgrounds.
Who issues the fines? It calls for money fines if you get caught smoking.
I will get back to you on that, Mr. Healy.
All right.
Good question, though, yes.
Okay, all set, okay.
Oh, this is a Board of Health thing?
Yeah, that's the Board of Health.
That's the Board of Health regulation that you're looking at. But it doesn't mean that if we adopted verbatim that we wouldn't have the same question. So
Yeah.
we're going to have to figure that out. You see that,
Okay.
Connor?
Town administrator report?
I don't have one this week.
Okay.
It's because we've been keeping you too busy on your list.
Thursday is looking like a slow day, though, so I should be able to catch up.
Karen?
So sort of my three principal work activities this week were Elder Services, meeting with Barbara Farnsworth to review the Elder Services strategic plan, as I said I would, and then continued work with both with Keith German on some veteran service issues, and continuing to work with Tim White and the Affordable Housing Trust on affordable housing issues. Continues to be, one of our priorities, notwithstanding our 10% affordable housing stock, in excess of 10% affordable housing stock. I would be remiss not to mention that Hingham football is going to play at Fenway Park tomorrow night, so that'll be a great experience, I think, for the town and for the players. I don't know about you guys, but I love 4th of July in this town, but I have to say the Thanksgiving, Christmas season around town is just tremendous. So, you know, the signs are up for the variety of fairs and outings, and it just makes me smile as I drive around town and see all that going on. And last but not least, you know, it is one of those holidays where you can stop for a minute and remind yourself that you have a lot to be grateful for. And I'm grateful for this just fantastic community. So that's it.
I'd like to thank everybody who came to the Veterans Day celebration. Thank the chair for the very thoughtful comments that were made, as well as the moderator and the veteran service officer. I thought the police and fire units were very sharp. You know, as a selectman, that is one of my favorite days. I truly enjoy that. It's a great gathering, and it honors men and women who have served this country in uniform in a special way. So let's keep it up. Really appreciate it.
That was a special day, and there were many different people recognized. An Eagle Scout, the Veteran of the Year, Leslie Badger for all of her efforts to provide assistance and friendship to a veteran, going out of her way on her own time to do that. While it's always a very somber day to remember, it just makes you so proud of your community, and it was a privilege to be there. I have one thing, excuse me. We are placing a press release on our website tomorrow morning, but I would announce that the town of Hingham will be filing an application with the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court requesting further appellate review with respect to the Aquarian case to determine a purchase price for the Hingham water system. A full press release will be on the town website tomorrow. Our next meeting is going to be December, it's the 5th, right, Tom?
Yes.
So December 5th, we're going to be meeting every Tuesday in December. We'll be having our budget reviews. Our hope is to complete all the municipal budgets by the end of December, Lucy. So the advisory committee has plenty of time. And actually, I believe before we get together for our next meeting, Christmas in the Square will have taken place. That's on Friday the 1st. Thank you, Bonnard. And, you know, that again is a wonderful community event. All the sidewalks will be open. And great things happening all weekend. So in closing, I would just like to join my colleagues in extending everybody a very happy Thanksgiving and letting you know that we give thanks for not only all the support and the input that we get, but also for all of the wonderful volunteers and all the people, all the staff who just all work so hard together to make this a special community. So happy Thanksgiving, and we will see everybody in December.
All right, thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Oh, motion to adjourn?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.